I learned very early that love in my house came with conditions. Conditions I never seemed to understand, let alone meet. As a child, I didn't have the words for it. I only knew the feeling, standing just outside something warm, watching it happen without me. Our house wasn't broken in the way people usually imagine. There were no slammed doors, no shouting matches that echoed through the walls. Everything was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you question whether you're part of the room at all. My mother was always there, physically. She cooked, cleaned, paid bills, and spoke when necessary, but there was a distance between us that I couldn't cross, no matter how hard I tried. I used to follow her around as a little girl, hoping she'd notice me, hoping she'd smile, or ask me about my day, or even just touch my hair the way I saw other mothers do. Sometimes she would respond with a distracted hum or a brief nod, but her attention never stayed. It always felt like she was saving herself for something or someone else. I didn't understand what that meant until I was older. Christmas was the first time I realized I wasn't included. I must have been 6 or 7 when I noticed the difference. At school, kids would buzz with excitement as December came closer. They talked about decorating trees, baking cookies, wrapping presents, and spending time with their families. Their eyes lit up in a way I couldn't relate to, but desperately wanted to. So I went home that day, my heart full of hope. "Are we getting a Christmas tree?" I asked my mother. She didn't even look up from what she was doing. No, that was it. No explanation, no softness, just a flat, final answer. I remember standing there, waiting for more for her to change her mind, to say she was joking, to offer something else. But nothing came. That night, I sat by the window, watching the houses across the street glow with lights. I could see families moving inside, laughing, gathering, living something that felt so close, yet completely out of reach. I told myself it didn't matter, but it did. Every year after that followed the same pattern. December would arrive, and with it, the quiet emptiness of our home. No decorations, no traditions, no sense that the day meant anything at all. And yet, somehow, I knew my mother celebrated Christmas. Just not with me. I would overhear her on the phone sometimes. Her voice would change, become lighter, warmer, almost unrecognizable. She'd laugh in a way I had never heard directed at me. "Yes, I'll bring something." She'd say, "Of course, I wouldn't miss it." "Oh, they'll love that gift." I would sit in my room, listening carefully, trying to piece together the truth. She had somewhere to go. Somewhere I wasn't invited. The realization didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like a shadow stretching across the floor. At first, I made excuses for her. Maybe it was a work thing. Maybe it was something adults didn't bring children to. But as the years passed, those excuses stopped making sense. I started noticing the small things, the way she dressed differently on certain evenings in December, the way she carefully wrapped gifts, but never labeled any with my name, the way she avoided my eyes when she was about to leave. "Where are you going?" I asked once, my voice small. "Out," she replied. "Can I come?" A pause. "No." That single word settled into me like something permanent. After that, I stopped asking. Instead, I learned to pretend it didn't bother me. I'd stay in my room, read books, or fall asleep early, telling myself I didn't care about holidays or traditions, that they were overrated, that I was fine on my own. But children aren't built to feel invisible, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, there was always that quiet ache, the kind that doesn't scream, but never really goes away. The worst part wasn't the absence of Christmas, it was the absence of being chosen. Year after year, I waited for something to change. For her to turn to me and say, "Come with me," for her to see me, not just as someone who lived in the same house, but as someone who belonged. But that moment never came, and slowly, without realizing it, I began to understand my place in her world. I wasn't forgotten by accident. I was simply never included to begin with. Leaving that house didn't feel dramatic. There was no argument, no final explosion of everything I had held inside for years. No desperate attempt from my mother to make me stay. It happened quietly, like everything else in our relationship. On the morning I left, she stood in the kitchen, stirring her tea as if it were any other day. "I'm moving out," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She nodded once, all right. No questions, no concern. Not even curiosity about where I was going. That was the moment something inside me settled. Not broke, not shattered, just settled. Like dust finally finding the ground after floating in the air for too long. I picked up my small bag and walked out. And just like that, I was on my own. The world outside wasn't kind, but at least it was honest. There were no hidden expectations, no quiet exclusions. If you worked, you earned. If you didn't, you struggled. It was simple in a way my childhood had never been. I rented a tiny room at first. The walls were thin, the window barely opened, and the heater worked only when it felt like it. But it was mine that mattered more than comfort. I took whatever jobs I could find, waiting tables, working late shifts, answering phones in offices where no one remembered my name. Some days I barely slept. Other days I wondered if I had made a mistake leaving so soon, with so little. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered that house, the silence, the distance, the feeling of not belonging. And I kept going. Money was always tight in the beginning. I learned how to stretch every coin, how to turn simple ingredients into meals that lasted days, how to say no to things I wanted because survival came first. There were nights I sat on the floor, eating instant noodles straight from the pot, telling myself this was temporary, that one day things would be different, and slowly they were. I found a stable job, nothing glamorous, but steady. The kind of job that gave me a routine, a paycheck I could rely on, and a small sense of security I had never known before. I worked hard, harder than anyone expected, not because I loved the job, but because I loved what it represented, independence. No one could take this away from me. No one could decide whether I deserved it or not. Every promotion, every small raise, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Years passed before I realized something had changed. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. It wasn't loud or obvious. It showed up in small ways, buying something without checking the price twice, sleeping through the night without worry, laughing at something without that familiar weight in my chest. I even started creating my own traditions, nothing extravagant, just small rituals that made life feel fuller. On quiet evenings, I'd light a candle and sit by the window, watching the world move outside. Sometimes I'd cook a proper meal, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And every December, something inside me stirred. At first, I tried to ignore it. Christmas still felt like something that didn't belong to me. But one year, I decided to stop running from it. I bought a small artificial tree. It wasn't perfect. The branches were uneven, and it took longer than expected to assemble. But when I finally placed it in the corner of my apartment, something shifted. For the first time, I wasn't watching Christmas from the outside. I was creating it. I added a few cheap ornaments, a string of lights, and a single star at the top. Then I stepped back and just looked at it. It wasn't about the decorations, it was about what they meant. Choice. I had chosen this. That moment stayed with me for years. It grew into something bigger than I expected, a quiet determination to build a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. So I saved carefully, patiently, relentlessly, Every extra hour, every sacrifice, every decision brought me closer to something I had never dared to imagine before. A home, not just a place to live, but a place that was entirely mine. A space where no one could make me feel invisible. And one day, after years of working and waiting, I stood in front of a house with my name on the papers. It wasn't enormous, but it was beautiful in a way that mattered. Sunlight filled the rooms, the walls felt open, welcoming. There was a small garden in the back, just enough to make the space feel alive. As I stepped inside, something deep within me finally exhaled. This wasn't just a house, it was proof. Proof that I had built something from nothing. That I had survived being overlooked, excluded, forgotten, and still created a life worth living. That night, sitting alone in my new living room, I realized something quietly powerful. I hadn't just left my past behind. I had outgrown it. It was a quiet evening in early December when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved, but something about it felt familiar, like a shadow from a life I had already closed the door on. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, watching the screen as if it might explain itself. Then, without fully knowing why, I picked up. Hello, there was a pause, soft breathing on the other end, and then it's me. I hadn't heard her voice in years. Not in real life, not through a screen, not even in memory, if I was honest. I had spent so long pushing that part of my life away that hearing her now felt almost unreal. My fingers tightened around the phone. Mom. The word came out unfamiliar, like something borrowed from someone else's story. Yes, she said gently, as if we had spoken just yesterday. It's been a long time. 10 years, to be exact. 10 years of silence, no calls, no messages, no birthdays remembered, no holidays acknowledged, just absence. I didn't expect to hear from you. I replied carefully. I know, she said, her voice carrying something that almost sounded like regret. But not quite enough to be real. I've been thinking about you. That made something in my chest tighten, thinking about me now, after all this time. We spoke for a few minutes, exchanging safe, distant updates. She asked about my work. I answered politely. I asked how she was. She said she was fine. It felt like a conversation between strangers trying to recreate something that had never truly existed. And then, just as the silence began to stretch again, she said it. I was wondering if you'd come for Christmas this year. Everything inside me stilled. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Christmas? She had never invited me, not once, not as a child. Not as a teenager, not even after I left, and now, suddenly, why? The question slipped out before I could stop it. There was a pause, slight but noticeable. Well, she said slowly, it's time we come together, you know, as a family. Family? The word felt heavy, like something that didn't quite belong between us. I leaned back against the couch, my eyes drifting toward the softly lit tree in the corner of my living room. The one I had decorated myself. The one that existed because I had chosen to create something I was never given. For years, I had imagined this moment, her calling, her reaching out, her finally asking me to be part of something I had spent my childhood longing for. I thought it would feel different, warmer, but instead, there was something else beneath it. Doubt. Why now? I asked again, quieter this time. Another pause. I just miss you, she said. The words were right. Perfect even, but they didn't feel true. Still, a small part of me, the part that had once stood by the window watching other families celebrate, stirred with something fragile and dangerous. Hope. I closed my eyes for a second, weighing everything I had built against everything I had lost. All right, I said finally, I'll come. The days leading up to Christmas felt strange. I found myself thinking about things I hadn't revisited in years. Memories surfaced quietly. The house, the silence, the unanswered questions I had long since stopped asking. I told myself this was closure, a chance to step back into that world, not as the child who had been overlooked, but as someone who no longer needed anything from it. Still, something didn't sit right. The call had been too sudden, too convenient, and then, a few days before Christmas, I got another hint. A message this time from my cousin. "Heard you're doing really well these days. We should catch up." I stared at the screen, a slow understanding beginning to form. In all these years, no one had reached out. Not once. And now, within days of my mother's call, they were suddenly interested. I didn't reply, but I didn't ignore it either. Instead, I paid attention. When Christmas Day arrived, I drove to the house I had once called home. The streets looked the same, the neighborhood unchanged, but I felt like a visitor passing through someone else's past. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something immediately. The house was decorated. Lights framed the roof. A wreath hung on the door. Through the window, I could see a tall Christmas tree glowing in the corner. So she had always celebrated, just never with me. I stepped out of the car, the cold air sharp against my skin, and walked toward the door. For a moment, I hesitated, not because I was afraid, but because I understood something clearly now. Whatever waited inside, it wasn't about reconciliation. It was about something else, something I was about to uncover. I knocked, the door opened almost instantly, and there she was, smiling wider than I had ever seen her smile at me. "Come in," she said warmly, too warmly. As I stepped inside, I realized something with quiet certainty. This wasn't an invitation, it was a setup, and this time I wasn't the same person they had once ignored. The warmth inside the house felt staged, not fake, just rehearsed, like everyone had agreed, without saying it out loud, to play their parts a little too well. "Look who's here," my aunt said, her voice overly bright as she stepped forward to hug me. "It's been so long." Too long, I thought. But I smiled politely. "It has." My cousins followed, greeting me with the kind of enthusiasm that felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. Their eyes lingered a second too long, scanning me in ways that had nothing to do with affection, measuring, evaluating. I had seen that look before, just not in this house, not until now. Dinner was already set, the table fuller than I remembered it ever being. Plates of food, glasses neatly arranged, candles flickering in a way that tried a little too hard to feel meaningful. My mother stayed close to me as I walked in, as if proximity alone could rewrite history. "Sit here," she said, guiding me to a seat near the center. Near her, I noticed that, for years, I had been placed at the edges, quiet, unnoticed, easy to overlook. Now, suddenly, I was in the middle of everything, important, or at least useful. The conversation started harmlessly enough. Questions about my job, my life, my routine. "So, what do you do exactly?" one cousin asked, leaning forward. I answered simply, "And you live alone?" Another added, "Yes." There were exchanged glances, small, quick, but impossible to miss. "And your house?" my aunt said casually as she reached for her glass. "It must be lovely." I took a slow sip of water before responding. "It is." That single word seemed to open something. My mother smiled, her eyes softer than I remembered, but there was something else beneath it now. "Something calculated. We've heard a lot about it," she said. "Big windows, a garden, spacious," my cousin added. "Peaceful," another chimed in. The words circled the table like quiet signals being passed between them. I didn't interrupt. I let them talk. Dessert came, and with it, the shift I had been waiting for. It was subtle at first. A pause in conversation, a glance exchanged between my mother and my aunt. Then you know. My aunt began, her tone light but deliberate. We've been thinking about spending more time together, as a family. I stayed still, my fork resting untouched on my plate. That would be nice, I said evenly. Yes, my mother added quickly. It's important, especially now. Exactly, my cousin said. And your place, it sounds perfect for that. There it was, finally, out in the open, even if they were still trying to dress it up as something else. I set my fork down gently. What do you mean? I asked, though I already knew. My mother leaned in slightly, her voice soft, persuasive. Well, your house is bigger than this one, more comfortable. We thought maybe we could start having gatherings there. Holidays, weekends, everyone together, my aunt added. Like we should have always been, someone else said. I let the silence settle after that, let their words hang in the air, heavy with expectation. They were waiting for me to agree, to be grateful, to finally feel included. I smiled, not the small, hopeful smile of a child waiting to be chosen. But something calmer, stronger. I actually have something to tell you too, I said, their attention sharpened instantly. Curious, eager, I sold the house. The reaction was immediate. What? My mother's voice broke slightly. You what? My cousin added, sitting up straighter. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Last week. The room fell into a stunned silence. All that warmth, the carefully constructed atmosphere cracked in an instant. But why? My aunt asked, confusion slipping through. I shrugged lightly. It just didn't feel right anymore. That part wasn't entirely true, but what came next was. I leaned back slightly, meeting their eyes one by one. I realized something recently, I said calmly. A house doesn't become a home just because people fill it. No one spoke. It becomes a home because of how you're treated inside it. My mother's expression shifted, something uneasy flickering across her face. I spent years wishing I could sit at this table, I continued, waiting for an invitation that never came. The words weren't loud, they didn't need to be. I thought maybe one day I'd be included, that I'd matter enough. I paused, letting that settle. But now that I have something of my own, suddenly I do. The silence deepened, no one denied it, no one could. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back just enough to break the stillness. I'm glad I came tonight, I said, my voice steady. It helped me understand something I needed to. My mother looked at me, her lips parting, as if to say something. But nothing came out. For once, she didn't have the right words. I hope you have a good Christmas. I added gently, and I meant it. Not out of obligation, but because I no longer needed anything from them. I walked out the same way I had years ago. Quietly, but this time it felt different. Lighter, as I stepped into the cold night air, I realized something that settled deep within me. This wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about finally choosing myself. When I reached my house, the lights were still glowing softly. The tree stood in the corner, steady and warm, exactly as I had left it. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me. Not as emptiness, but as peace. No expectations, no conditions, just mine. I walked over, poured myself a cup of hot chocolate, and sat by the window. Outside, the world was full of noise, laughter, togetherness. Inside, I had something better, clarity, and a quiet kind of happiness that didn't need anyone else to exist. Sometimes revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's about no longer giving them the power to matter. And as I sat there, watching the lights flicker gently against the night, I knew one thing for certain. I had finally come home,